Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to work in charcoal once again, and I'm going to do a drawing of this bunny. Let's start. Like the previous time, I'm going to use several different forms of charcoal pencils, charcoal powder, vine charcoal, and the paper that I'm going to be using is going to be the same paper that I used for the previous drawing, so a Master Start sketching paper. Just doing the sketch and modifying the shape of the ears and the head a little bit until I get it to look right. The reference will be included in the description as usual. First I'm going to do a little bit of work with a piece of willow charcoal. I'm going to go around the edges of the sketch, but after that I'm going to have to cover the background with charcoal powder. Charcoal powder will allow me to cover these large areas very quickly. First I'm going to put down the charcoal dust, then I'm going to move it around a little bit with a brush to distribute it a bit more evenly. And normally I blend with a tissue or a paper towel, but this time I decided to use my finger because I wanted the background to be a little bit darker. Normally when I want the background to be a bit lighter, I use a paper towel, but here I'm really going to try to push in that charcoal dust to create a darker background, because I want to establish contrast between the main subject and the background, because some parts of the main subject, some parts of the rabbit's head and the ears will be a lot lighter than the background. So this is a messy part of the process where I have to do a lot of blending with my fingers. And your finger is a great blending tool for these large areas, especially if you want to make them really dark. Now, in addition to the fingers, I'm also going to use a brush to even things out a little bit, but I'm going to use it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to use this soft brush, and I'm actually going to use it to lift up a little bit of charcoal here and there. So I'm wiping the brush off of my hand so that it's relatively clean, and that way I can keep lifting up charcoal in some areas where I want the background to be a little bit lighter. What I'm trying to create with this is I'm trying to create a little bit of variation in value in the background. I don't want any specific shapes or anything in the background. It's just a more or less plain background, out of focus bokeh background. But like I said, I want some maybe suggestions of some lighter shapes back there. Anyway, once that is done, I can start working on the main subject. I'm going to start with the ears, because I normally work from left to right and from top to bottom. And I'm going to start working with a charcoal pencil. I'm going to use a couple of different charcoal pencils, but for the most part I'm going to work with a soft charcoal pencil. And these are Koh-i-Noor charcoal pencils. Now you can see how I'm making these strokes to imitate the appearance of the fur, trying to match both the length and the direction of the fur. In these areas where the fur is lighter and where it's more exposed to the light source, I'm using less pressure and using fewer of those pencil strokes. And it looks like a bunch of lines at first, but when you start blending, and I'm blending now with a bristle brush, I mostly use flat brushes, by the way. Once you start blending, the fur, or those lines rather, become softer and they start to look a lot more realistic. Blending is very important when you're drawing fur, because you can't draw every single hair. So by blending your pencil strokes, you're making it look like the fur has more density, more thickness. And it's also adding a little bit of value to it, so that's something that you need to keep in mind. So what happens when you blend, these pencil strokes get softened, and you lose a little bit of that value contrast. The way to bring that value contrast back is of course to work with erasers. Right now I'm using a Koh-i-Noor pencil eraser. It's like a rubber eraser in wood casing, and it can be sharpened like a regular pencil. It's very convenient, and it allows me to draw lighter lines the same way that I would draw with a pencil, except for the fact that now I'm not drawing dark lines, I'm drawing white lines. Well, they're not completely white, but they're a lot lighter, so I'm creating some texture, some lighter hairs, and I'm modifying both the shape and the texture of that fur on the bunny's ear. I'm using that eraser in a combination with a kneaded eraser, but in this case, for this drawing, I'm going to use the pencil eraser for the most part. Here I'm moving on to the rest of the head, drawing some of the darker details around the nose and the mouth. If you don't have this particular eraser, you can use the Tombow Mono Zero eraser or anything similar that will allow for a little bit of precision, while at the same time allowing you to work with your eraser as though you were holding a pencil, because like I said, it's just more convenient that way. The eye is for the most part one of the darkest details on this drawing, on this portrait of a rabbit, but it has a nice reflection in there. The reflection is not completely white. That catchlight is not going to be completely white. It's going to be kind of subdued, but the trick here is to create contrast between those darker areas and that lighter portion, which I'm just going to reserve that light space and gently push charcoal onto it, creating that gradual transition, because I want it to look like a smooth, round surface. That's basically what the eye is. It's a smooth, round surface. It usually has some kind of a catchlight or a reflection in it. As for the fur around it, I'm going to try to imitate the texture of the fur by trying to match the length and the direction of the fur with the length and the direction of my pencil strokes. Now you mustn't get caught up into drawing just the texture and these tiny hairs. The important thing is to remember the larger relationships between the lighter areas and the shadow areas. That's why I decided to define the shadow area using that piece of wine charcoal, or willow charcoal rather. So I'm just going to use it to cover this whole right side of the face and the head, because that appears to be the shadow side. There are some lighter portions on it, like for example here around the nose and just under the nose. Those are some parts of that nose area which are sticking out and which are catching some light from the light source. And the light source appears to be coming more from the left side and a little bit from behind, because I can see that from the way that the ear is catching light on both the left edge and the right side as well, even though the right side generally is a little bit darker. So the top of the head, especially the top left, is going to appear lighter because that's where the light source is coming from, and that's the part of the head which is more exposed to the light source. Once I have that in place, I'm just going to do some blending, and I'm going to refine the texture of the fur a little bit later. Here I'm doing a little bit more of the background by creating a bit more charcoal powder, and I normally create charcoal powder by sharpening one of my woodless charcoal pencils. So I just sharpen it, I let the charcoal dust fall onto the paper, and then I blend. I use that charcoal dust in a combination with the willow charcoal, and using these two types of materials allows me to cover larger areas very quickly, but also to manipulate the amount of value very easily, because that way I can add or take away value almost as though I were painting, and I can control how dark I want the background to be in different places. I'm starting to work on this inner side of the ear where we're going to have some slightly longer hair, and in some of these parts of the ear the hair is going to appear a little bit darker than in others. The left side of that ear is more exposed to the light source than the inner side, which is facing slightly away from the light source and more towards us. That side of the ear is going to be darker, especially the lower part of it. The left side, which is exposed to the light source, I still did add a little bit of texture to it. I added a few pencil strokes. I'm going to blend those and I'm going to refine them with a pencil eraser a little bit later. Once that is done, once I've refined the details on the ear, I can start working again with a pencil eraser, and you can see that I also added some small details on that ear, like some veins and some smaller shapes within that earlobe. Here I'm also making the right edge a little bit lighter because it's catching some light from behind, and then refining the texture by adding some of these smaller, finer, lighter hairs. I'm sorry I skipped over a part of the drawing process there. For some reason that part of the video footage was corrupted and I couldn't really do anything with it, but I don't think you missed much. It happens from time to time. Anyway, now as you can see, I'm gonna start working on the forehead area. The fur is a little bit light, shorter here rather, and the fur is also a bit shorter around the eye, but on this right side it's a lot darker. That's something to keep in mind because as I've already mentioned, you mustn't get caught up in drawing all these tiny details and forget about the larger relationships, because this right side of the face still needs to remain a lot darker than the one that is exposed to the light source. So now that I'm blending, it can seem like I'm ruining that contrast, but I'm still aware of the fact that the right side is going to be darker, and after all, once I go over it with a charcoal pencil drawing the texture of the fur, it's going to get darker. So I'm just going to keep refining this now with a pencil eraser. And that's both going to make the fur look a little bit more realistic, but at the same time it's going to make that left side and the top of the head a little bit lighter, which is what I want because that part of the head is more exposed to the light source. And the eye here, which is barely visible, was an interesting detail. I tried my best to make it look like a round reflective surface, but now I'm going to draw some of these longer hairs, some of these whiskers, and yeah, the rabbits apparently also have whiskers which are coming out of the eyebrow area and the nose and the mouth area. So some of them are going to be a little bit longer than others, some of them are going to appear a little bit lighter than others. I don't really need them to look completely white because in the reference they're also not completely white. And the best way to draw them is usually by making a single stroke and not interrupt it, and not to interrupt that movement, because that way they look better. So just drawing some shorter fur with that pencil eraser on the front of the head, and drawing some more of these whiskers, and doing a little bit of refining both with a pencil and with an eraser. You can see how useful that eraser was to me. Honestly, I mean, you could try to achieve the same effect with a kneaded eraser, because the kneaded eraser can be used for precision erasing. But the thing is that it doesn't work quite as well, or at least it's not quite as convenient, because with an eraser and a pencil, you can just pull these lighter strokes in exactly the same way as though you were drawing with a pencil. And it just feels like a very natural way to work. I'm just doing a little bit more shading with a piece of willow charcoal, establishing that darker background to the right, and doing a little bit more work on both the value and the texture of the fur on the right side of the face, which is going to be darker. Some parts of that head need to remain lighter, but I'm going to refine that further with an eraser a little bit later. This part of the fur here, or part of the body here under the head, is going to be darker, because wherever you have folds in the fur, and these usually form around the places where the head or where the body twists or bends, you're going to have the folds in the skin and folds in the fur, and there's going to be some shadow areas there which will be indicating some sort of edge or a transition between two different parts of the body. Also, this part of the body to the right is darker, which is why I'm using these bolder, darker strokes to draw the fur in this area, because that's basically the shadow side of the body, and the whole throat and the chest area, which is exposed to the light source, needs to remain lighter. Right now it doesn't look like much, the fur looks like a whole bunch of lines, but I'm going to soften it with a brush, and it's going to start to look a lot more natural, a lot fluffier, a lot more like the actual rabbit's fur. So I'm doing that right now with a brush, and I use a couple of different types of brushes, but when I draw fur I prefer to use a bristle brush, because it allows me to retain a lot of that texture, so that some of these lines, even though they're softened, they're still there. And the fur is already starting to look much more realistic, it's starting to look a lot better. But I can't really leave it like that. I'm still going to do a lot of refining with a pencil eraser. It's just that I could leave it like this if I wanted to. If I was going for a maybe slightly simpler, slightly more impressionistic drawing, I would leave it like that. Now it's time to do a little bit of work with an eraser on this left side of the mouth area, where I'm going to draw some shorter, lighter hairs. You can see this part of the nose and mouth area is catching some light, so I'm going to make it lighter and leave the shadow around it. This top part of the nose also is catching a little bit of light, so I'm just going in with a pencil eraser here and there, creating some of those areas of lighter value. And now I'm pulling those larger, taller, or rather longer whiskers, again trying to draw them in a single stroke so that they would look smoother and better and more natural. But obviously you can't really accomplish that every single time, because one of the things that's kind of tricky for me when I'm recording is that I can't really rotate the drawing much, and I can't really change the angle that much, so that the footage would look better. But I'm trying to do the best I can. Right now I'm refining this chest and neck area by adding some lighter pencil strokes to create a little bit more depth in that fur, make it look a bit more three-dimensional, refine that texture a little bit. But as always, I mustn't forget that the right side of the body needs to remain darker. So just doing a little bit of work here and there with a pencil eraser, making sure that I have nice contrast between the light areas and the shadow areas. There's going to be some more whiskers here. These are going to be drawn with a charcoal pencil, because they're in the shadow, they're going to appear darker. So I'm just going to use a pencil for them, but the tip of them is, of some of them is sticking out and catching some light, so I'm going to finish the rest of them with a pencil eraser. That's a little bit tricky to continue that thin line and just draw a white line issuing out of it, but I'm kind of hoping that it looks natural. Anyway, just a little bit more work here and there, mostly refining the appearance of the fur, and the drawing is almost done. I want to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. Give me a like, comment, let me know what you think. Check out my other videos. I'm going to put my signature here in the lower left corner, and I'm going to draw my signature with a pencil eraser, so I can use it for that as well. And now, as you can see, my drawing, my portrait of a bunny rabbit is done. If you want to see a lot more content, if you want to see longer videos and some real-time footage, then you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching. I'm going to see you in the next video. Bye for now.